we see now with voice impersonation. It's getting easier and easier, like going viral now with all the people that are like, hey, I'm going to make it sound like this radio star, this rock star, this musician. But that could also be, how am I going to make it sound like your CEO or your CFO, and adapt the script automatically. I can make a video where someone is actually talking to you and setting up a video conference with you, or a recorded message to you. And I mean, that's been around for a long time, but it's just way more effective and way more accurate. It's harder and harder to tell the difference of what is fabricated data versus real data. And if you get a call from your CEO saying that I'm in a customer meeting right now for a $2 billion deal, I can't access my laptop, there's very few people that will say no to the CEOs when they're asking for, like, my password is not working. What is it? Yeah.
You are listening to The Secure Developer, where we speak to leaders and experts about DevSecOps, Dev and Sec collaboration, cloud security, and much more. The podcast is part of the DevSecCon community, found on devseccon.com, where you can find incredible dev and security resources and discuss them with other smart and kind community members. This podcast is sponsored by Snyk. Snyk's developer security platform helps developers build secure applications without slowing down, fixing vulnerabilities in code, open source containers, and infrastructure as code. To learn more, visit snyk.io/TSD.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Secure Developer. Thanks for tuning back in. Today, we'll continue some of our AI security conversation on it from a lens that is both sort of internal, but also a provider, also a leader in the AI space, which is the sort of a little bit of a Salesforce perspective and just generally a knowledgeable security professional, having sort of seen a bunch of these sort of tech trends before. So for that, we have with us Henrik Smith, who is a VP of security, as well as risk operations and enterprise security at Salesforce. All sorts of titles and scopes under your title. So Henrik, thanks for joining us here on the podcast.
Hey, thanks, guy, and thanks for having me.
So Henrik, as we get going, indeed, in that sort of scope of responsibilities, also you have an interesting journey. Give us a few minutes on your maybe background and what is it that you do for people's context.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say background has been a while. I think I'm coming into my 28th year of this space right now. Started back in the day when it was totally fine for a 16-year-old to start fiddling with Unix systems in an enterprise organization. So yeah, I've been around for a while and been in a lot of different areas of the industry as well, for, I would say, both sides or all sides of the table. Last period, so I spent 5 years with AWS security before I joined Salesforce about 4.5 years ago now, in the security integration team, and now called a number of different things, I would say. But yeah, so I lead our risk operations center at Salesforce together with our BISO organizations, our business information security organization. Also covering the information security officer for our enterprise organization temporarily here. So it's a couple of different hats, and I like to say that I poke at a lot of things and have opinions.
But it's sort of a central responsibility that works, like has some responsibility for tooling or sort of decisions globally, but then also works with the BISOs from the different parts of the org that in which you're, I guess, kind of guiding and supporting as opposed to actually kind of operating their domains.
Correct. So the BISO organization sits under me, and they cover the security strategy and security prioritization for all our commercial services. And we call them clouds, but for all the services. So you'll see them outside as like Service Cloud and Marketing Cloud in the various names. So they sit under, and then we also have the Risk Operations Center, which is focused on systemic risk remediation for a lot of the large-scale initiatives that we run, which partner, of course, with all the other areas like security assurance, our TPM organization, and the various risk organizations we have, anything from internal risk to nation statewide, whatever it could be. So we collaborate a lot across the whole company. One thing that we're focusing primarily on is systemic risk that has been around for a long time, or just things that continuously come up that impact the whole company that might have to take a different approach to, and primarily sort of shift left as much as we can on how we remediate things. I think the time where people are just throwing out problem statements or throwing out the complexity over to the individual engineer and developer is gone. Like we have to move away from that. We have to move to fixing things centrally as much as we can and focusing on fixing the source. I think too many years people have been focusing too much on just solving the outcomes instead of solving the actual problems causing them. So that's one thing that we're trying to do across the whole company, and seeing how can we help people to fix things versus letting them do it? And how can we actually move security to be a full service organization, which it is. Security has always been a service organization. I think people have just mistaken that for being in enforcing and a body of no. So
yeah, indeed. Well, it's like I guess maybe over the years there was just sort of a misalignment in terms of people within the security organizations that saw themselves as a service organization versus people outside. But hopefully, as an industry, we're working to fix that.
Exactly.
So let's sort of dig a little bit into tech change, and especially kind of in the context of AI and in your role in which you have a very broad remit. And so maybe before we dig specifically into AI, when you think about maybe few technology paradigms are quite as dramatic as what we're sort of seeing right now with AI and LLMs, but still, when you're in that role, also you've sort of seen through your journey various tech innovations come in and disrupt a little bit the status quo. From a security lens perspective, how do you start thinking about these types of problems? What's your maybe more broad approach, and then we'll get a bit more specific with AI and with what you see working, not working, from what you see from within Salesforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And preface that, like at Salesforce, we have a lot of different teams working on AI from different aspects, anything from audit reviews, security reviews, to how we incorporate AI into our own services and how we build our own AI models to sort of help our customers. But I think the key here is what you said. It's around the technology shifts that have been throughout the years. And it's one of those where it's hard not to draw a parallel to that anyone now wants AI in their services, both from a defensive security, but also inside the services. They want to sell AI services. And I mean, it's hard to not draw the parallels to a couple of years ago when it was machine learning. And before that, it was the next service. And before that was next service. So I think it is a technology shift. It is a new technology that allows us to do a lot of things we couldn't do before. However, I think people need to not panic too much on the specific technology shift of how to do things, how to solve assurance, how to solve data governance, etc. And just use the process and the principles that you already have, and not so much trying to like reinvent the wheel every time. Follow the same process as you had before when it comes to like, where do you have data? What is your data governance policies? Where's data going to be stored with this moving forward? How are you going to store it? Who's going to be able to access it? And I think that most of the processes and the principles that you already had still applies. That hasn't changed. It's still data sitting somewhere, processed by someone, and it's egress and ingress somehow. And it's the same as you've done before. So while I think that from a technology perspective, it is a massive shift, it allows us to build services that we've never seen before. From a security perspective, it adds a number of new challenges that we haven't been faced with as much as before, but that doesn't mean that we have to do everything from scratch. Mm-hmm. What we're doing today, what we did yesterday, is still what we can do tomorrow to help secure our data, secure our customers, and not trying to, again, don't try to reinvent the wheel every time something happens in the industry.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's also aligned with a lot of maybe the nascent sort of threat models or such. When you see them pop around, it's like really like 90% of them is, well, like just sort of maintain a good hygiene process and follow that along. And there's places in which you need to adapt it to sort of to AI or to LLMs, but not necessarily, you don't need to go back to first principles and build the whole thing to be AI minded. The security first principles or the sort of the robust software first principles work.
No, exactly. And I think in general, we talked about this, but it's an area where a lot of what we do in security is preventing people from making mistakes. But that's always been the case. It's help people to not make less effective, less helpful decisions in their daily life, say it lightly. But I think that is one of the things with Gen AI is that it does allow people to make less informed choices easier than we've ever had before. It's easier to make severe mistakes than we've ever done before, just because it is so enticing to use. And it's one of those where, take a simple thing as data governance, like where do you store your data? It is so easy to just start spinning up a prompt somewhere and for a service that is just available as a demo and start typing away and just seeing like all the power that you can get from Gen AI services. And it's not with ill intent. It's more that it's so enticing from the results you're getting back. They're like, hey, let me just try this as well. And let me just try this as well. And then suddenly like, you put data somewhere that you had no idea where it was just because you wanted to try it. And that has always been the case. It is just that it's so tempting now with the results that you can get. And it's like, hey, I can actually get my whole like sales call pre-printed and with all the different possibilities of where it's going to go, or I can get my threat model created for me as it is. Like you can do a full stride just by uploading your internal documents and your internal system architectures, especially now with image recognition as well in a lot of the AI models. And it's more, are you doing the right things? Like, have you done the research? Like, where's the data stored? Like, which service are you using? Do you have a contract with them? I mean, most services now actually do operate on ephemeral data. So they're not going to store your prompts. They're not going to store your data. However, have you verified that? Do you know where it's going to go? So I think it's preventing people from making mistakes. And I think that's where one of the biggest challenges from data governance and from internal security is like making sure that people don't make mistakes.
So
and this goes also on the service building piece of it. So
how do you tackle that on it? Like you've got a super elaborate organization on it. You've got different people, they have different authorities on it. You correctly say that you are sort of seeing how it's easier than ever and more tempting than ever to pass data along without maybe sufficient thought or consideration on it. At the same time, you're saying don't entirely freak out about those, but like what's right over here? Like, should you block all use of whatever ChatGPT in the organization until such time that everybody's sufficiently well educated on it? If you don't do that, like, I guess what's the right way to deal with that? Don't go to either extreme.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question. And I think that speaking of less informed decisions, I think going in and blocking all use of GenAI and blocking all traffic to GenAI services, no matter where it is, it's also one of those where it's a very good career limiting move, I think. If your approach is that you're going to block everything, I think this is, again, where you have to fall back and understand that security is a service. And if you don't provide the best service, people walk around you and find the best service. If you can provide a safe and more effective way of getting to the data, for example, setting up various types of prompt filters, or if you either use a commercial service, if you built your own service, awesome. But if you have that kind of service, be proactive and build and offer a safe or safer way for people to do it. If your approach is to block, you will always be circumvented. Like people will always walk around you. So I think the best things, honestly, people can do is like, hey, be educate yourself, like see where this stuff is going, like have a vendor to work with. If you don't have the capability to spin up your own AI models, but have a vendor, partner with, make sure that you have the contracts in place, make sure you guide people to the right location instead of trying to block everything. That has never and will never work. It doesn't matter which service it is. Like we've seen that in every technology shift. Blocking things will never work. People just go on the side. And the more on the side they do, the harder it is to detect it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the business kind of drives the result, right? You know, that's the one that pays the bills, including the security bills. So it's not.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
This is a business enabler for sure. And if you stand in the way, again, it's not the best career move to stand in the way of one of your biggest potential revenue driver.
Indeed. Okay, cool. So we understand that, probably sort of summarizing a bit of that guidance is don't freak out. Don't freak out on the sort of, I need to totally reinvent the wheel and sort of shut everything down, but also don't neglect it because it's easy for people to make mistakes easily. So probably just sort of move quickly, find the right partner, the right vendor, the right sort of tools. They don't need to be perfect. They just sort of need to help you move along and then put the sort of mitigating efforts and then kind of get going. I guess kind of maybe the next question is, who is you in this context? So, you have, again, especially kind of in Salesforce, but also it's true for any large organization. There are so many people, everybody's looking into AI. How do you think about ownership of AI? Like you've got the security lens of it. Who should be owning this on it? How do you organize? Because it did kind of land on us somewhat faster than past technologies.
No, absolutely. And I think that's where, honestly, a lot of organizations that I talk to in general at events or just panels or whatever it could be, I think that's where a lot of people struggle is like who owns and what organization owns the various aspects of it, because you will always have multiple owners in this case, I think. I don't think you can have one single owners because you will have people that are trying to build it from a research perspective. You have people that are trying to build it from a external service perspective. You'll have people that are trying to integrate it with various items. And you will, of course, have like the security piece. And even in security, you will have multiple owners. I don't think that you're going to be able to find in a lot of technology pieces, like, doesn't matter if it is database security, it doesn't matter if it's like sort of traditional mentality, but or if it is as network security, whatever, it's way clearer to find a dedicated owner within the organization. I think GenAI is one of those where collaboration is going to be the key. You're not going to find a single owner for it. You're going to have people that are working primarily on data governance. You're going to have very clear ownership when it comes to like security assurance and review side of it. Like what services, what vendors do we want to use, no matter who does your vendor audit for it. And you will have to have sort of an overall policy owner, of course, like how can we use this service? So I don't think that you can follow. This is one of those where you have to rethink a little bit of who owns it and instead have a very clear ratio of who owns what parts of the various aspects. And then collaboration. Collaboration is going to be the key on this one, is make sure that you have all the pieces intact of it. A simple thing like your learning data. For the people that are starting to create a new model internally, for example, what data are they using? Is that data sanctioned to be used? Where is that data going to go after? Even if you own it, you own the data, but you're still using that data for learning models, for example. Are you going to ingest code in that learning model? Is that code clean? Are you now setting up so your learning data contains, unscanned code, it contains secrets, it contains vulnerabilities, for example. Like this is where you can damage both yourself and others, because if you're setting up building a service that is based on faulty data or insecure services or insecure code or insecure contains secrets, whatever it could be, now you're not just putting your own service at risk, but you're also putting other people at risk. Are you going to sell that model out, for example? And we've seen cases before where people talk a lot about like, the data coming out is not sanctioned, it's not verified, it's made up or whatever it could be. There's been legal cases recently or a while back where people use it where they shouldn't. Not going to go into the legality of it, but I think that's where it's going to be a little more challenging is ownership is not one person. Ownership is a collaboration in this case. And you need to have a super clear ratio.
And I think I understand. I think also it's kind of quite practical to say everybody's going to jump on it. So you can't kind of go off and centralize, definitely not in a company that is large enough, all these different activities on it. I'm curious though, the model example speaks to me. I think I'm sort of, a bit in sort of code security and everything kind of points out that at the end of the day, the code agents, they're trained on code that humans wrote. And guess what? It has bugs, it has vulnerabilities on it. So at the best case scenario, if it produces code that also has vulnerabilities, I think it's a bit of a flawed assumption to think that it produces perfect code. But regardless, so it's a good point, that you need to train it, secrets even more sort of concerning than others. If we sort of hone in a bit on the ownership over there, in the developer security, you sort of start off, talking about how we need to fix some things in the source. Generally, we want to sort of shift things to the platform to an extent, right? Kind of, just sort of make some problems go away centrally. And then, some others we want to shift them to the time of code creation. What's the equivalent in AI? Like, is this an AI security team? Is this an app security team that kind of pulls up their sort of AI knowledge on it and they collaborate with whom? With like the data scientists? Like if we sort of, for instance, think about the data in for training model or roughly around that domain, what do you think about participants?
Yeah, my personal opinion, setting up a AI security team, I think that's honestly a little bit of a mistake, to be honest, because I think that you're adhering too much to technology changes. And it just means that, what about the next time this happens? What are the next technology shift? Are you going to create a new organization every time there's a new technology out there? And I think that's where a lot of people, just because AI is so, call it invasive almost in the organization of how we operate right now, everyone wants AI in their business plans. Everyone wants AI in their services. It doesn't matter if it's a vendor or if it's an in-house. There's not a single leader or executive right now that is not saying like, where are we using any AI in our services? Where are we using AI in our business plans? And what are we going to do with AI? But I don't think that it's time to start spinning up like dedicated organizations or dedicated teams for managing AI in that sense. I think this is one of those where it has to flow through all the teams and understand how is my piece impacting this. I do think, however, you need to have a very clear owner of, as I said earlier, the ratio of like who owns the pieces. I think it's more prevalent to have AI dedicated teams on the service side, but not on the security side. And one of the reasons is because once you start saying that you're going to have a dedicated team for it, you're going to lose out on the sort of the collective knowledge that people have from the various areas, because you will not have the people from the database side. You will not have database security side. You will not have the people from the network security side. And they are all critical pieces of it. So focus teams are good, but I don't think that you should have technology focused teams when it comes to organization security, and instead focus more on who owns the critical decisions that need to be done, who needs to focus on getting the information out there. Like I talked about security assurance, for example. Security assurance is a very critical piece around this when it comes to vendor reviews, when it comes to internal app reviews. But even there, they should own their pieces of it, but I don't think that they should own the overall strategy of how security should be using GenAI and what decision they make. They own their piece of it.
Yeah.
But everyone is different. Like if you have a strategic organization that owns like those initiatives, awesome. But spinning up a dedicated GenAI team, I don't think that's the right path to do it. I think this should be an interest in all the teams.
I understand the point, and I see sort of the logic in it, which is, the different risks and the different threats. AI gets weaved in through our stack. So we want to make sure that we bring to fore the relevant expertise and that we factor in AI in every one of these security lenses. I guess maybe asking about data specifically. So it does feel, and you've mentioned this several times already on this conversation, that a lot of the concerns when it comes to AI are forms of data manipulation, the data in, the data out, the data governance, the ease of someone sort of leaking out. Does it sort of restructure the data security team?
I think it absolutely does. No, I think it does, because it's the same there. Like you're basically using a lot of internal data, depending on what type of service you're building, of course. But you are using a lot of internal data to build services for external use in many cases. So I do think that it shifts a little bit on how you can think about data governance and in general data governance within the company, but also externally. It's like, are you going to use customer data for this? Are you going to use internal data? Are you like, what is the data classification of that, of where you can put it? Because while you're not putting that data specifically out there, you're putting a derivative of that data out there. So I think that your data governance team will have a little bit of mind shift of doing. They have to rethink a little bit of like where the data is stored and how it's used. And they need to really sit in and understand how the models work, how LLM works when it comes to like training data versus egress data. So I do think that it shifts. I don't think the responsibilities move. I think it's just like they need to shift on how they think of where data governance sit and data classification. Like I said earlier, like if you're building a training model on data that is faulty, whose accountability is that? Like if that is starting to generate faulty services outwards, who is accountable for that piece of it? Is it the people that should have detected that, hey, this code had faults in it that is now being taught out as one of your, for all your customers? Or is that something that the people they were building, like the data scientists that were building the model, should they have thought about it? So it's going to come down to like where, and it's not to sort of point fingers and saying you did wrong. It's more, what do we need to do with the data before we start using it?
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of it comes back to the same sort of ethos, I guess, of the sort of the shift left on the developer side of it, which is you have to roll it back to the source, to the place in which the decision was made, and make good decisions and then keep a good track record of them, and then maybe facilitate making those decisions correctly by the sort of the data security team. So whether it is in the sort of the ingest time or in the training time or in the whatever it is, visibility and engagement, I guess, in those phases. Yeah. I guess one other sort of security leader that I spoke to at one of the big banks pointed out that he's been investing heavily over the years in the relationship that he has with his development team, development organization, for other organization, but he's never really, up until now, had a super strong motivation to deeply engage with the data science team. It was fine. It was like one of the many things that don't quite make it to the top. And I guess I'm sort of curious, do you feel the same in Salesforce? Like, has there been a change in the relationship you and your team have with the data science teams?
I think both yes and no. I think Salesforce has been a little bit different just because if you look at our organization when it comes to our BISA organization, for example, like they sit entrenched in all the different businesses. So we do have coverage and sort of an integral part between security and the engineering side and the business side. That has always been there for the last like 4 years, 4.5 years since we started this organization. So I think that the collaboration was there. I think it just shifted a little bit on like who are the big names within the organizations and who has the most pull within the organizations. Like there's not a company today where the data research team is not, I wouldn't say very happy, but getting a lot of focus. I don't think they've ever gotten as much focus as they are now. Yeah, just because, I mean, the shift has moved a little bit from, for example, engineering in general to data warehouse services to, I mean, go back a couple of years again, like every service within a company that was working on like data lakes were the big names. Like they were the ones that were getting the resources and the focus. And it's the same there. Like we're just shifting around with the technology shifters of like what team are being highlighted and focused right now. Now it's a data research team. And this has happened throughout a couple of different areas for a while. I mean, if you look, it's going to be like 7 years ago when the automatic reasoning group started building at AWS, for example, to help build a lot of the services. I mean, that's when it's shifted more and more to be a research-based security posture and seeing how can we use the traditional fields of like research, of automatic reasoning, of basically pure math to not just be a crypto algorithm, but also to be how do we evaluate security? How do we get like a proper security posture of services and technology using more traditional resources, especially within the research community? So this is just another shift in that way where the data scientists today, they're working on AI, are getting more and more focused. They're getting more and more resources to help do their job. The biggest challenge, I think, is more we have to maintain that balance of while we're putting all the resources into, we got to build new AI models, we got to figure out how we can do it, like our research team or the kings now, or like the kings and queens is like, are we catching up with all the other resources? Like security, for example, are we doing the right thing on the resource there? I don't think that any organization should think that, like, oh, we need to hire 50 new people, go to this company and hire AI security specialist. I don't think that that's the right path either. It's more think about how can your service and how can your role within security be impacted by Gen AI? How can you either use Gen AI for your advantage, or how can other people use Gen AI against your against your role? If you are a security for network security, how will people exploit you using Gen AI services? But also, how can you use it to your advantage?
Yeah. So that's an interesting topic. We'll switch to the tooling here in a sec, but maybe just one more question on the Defender side, maybe, or I guess the other one is on Defender as well. But just say, so amidst those, so we have a bunch of these things, and I think you have a very thoughtful, like, this is the way to approach it, and this is, like, you need to embed it into the different organizations and into the process and where to put the emphasis in a slightly less systematic way. What keeps you up at night when it comes to AI security? What's the main concern that tops the list because of maybe the faster than usual adoption of this powerful technology?
I think one of the main concerns I have on it is, to be honest, people's ability to make mistakes has become so easy. And it is so easy to grab whatever internal information that you happen to have access to and use it in learning models that go outwards, that are going to be new services. And it's the people have always had a mentality of like, hey, I'm just doing a test. It's just for testing. I'm going to fix it later. I'm going to close it up later. I'm just going to try something out. And moving from I'm just going to try something out to, hey, here's the new service that we're selling is really fast and easy. And that's always been the case. I think it just today, if you say that you have a new Gen AI-based service, I think a lot of people will not care less, but I think that a lot of people will open doors for you faster than they might have done before to get that out, out as a service. So I think it's just easier, higher risk of people bypassing basic hygiene and general services and checks and boundaries that they should have done, just because it is such a hype right now of getting services out there. And that's my biggest fear, is that people would bypass the controls that we all have put in place to verify that, hey, this is a valid service. This does not have the flaws in it. And I think that's my biggest concern. It's people bypassing the rules and regulations that it should do. Or it's simply because people haven't caught up and added the policies and added the controls that it should have done. I don't think we can put everything at fault for the developers, and we shouldn't. Like, it's not their fault. If they can do something, they most likely will do something. And this is where the role of, like, you have to build a service for it and see how can we make it easier for them to do the right choices.
Right. Yeah. And I think that last bit is important in the solution aspect, right? So you're saying
there's always that aspect of like what's going to be used in attacks, etc. But I think the biggest fear is like people make mistakes.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point. And I like how you mentioned both. There's the mistake that you mentioned at the beginning, which is, hey, I'm just tempted to throw some sensitive data into it. And then there's the mistake you're also elaborating here, which is just the business, the competitive drive to benefit from this powerful technology so quickly that you would just run to either publish it or to use it faster than maybe what is prudent. And I think you were starting to say that what you can do as a security team to address it is to stand up a service to identify those cases, so at least you're in the line of fire and you have some ability to do something about it.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, just having the checklist and knowing that it's passed through all the processes that it should do. I mean, we spent a lot of time for us as well on making sure that we know and can trace, like, if changes going out have gone through the protocols, if you're tracking reviews, if you're doing the proper, like, assurance reviews, if you do code validation, like whatever it could be. But I think that's where people need to verify that their processes are sound. And if they don't have a process for it, I mean, they can always use GenAI to build a process.
Yeah.
So,
What type of questions would you ask if you're, well, actually, what type of questions do you ask when you, as a customer, purchase software from a vendor that is somehow, sort of AI driven? Like if you're starting to use a Copilot or whatever it is, like an SDR email writing or whatever it is, above and beyond the regular maybe security questionnaire that you might give such vendors, are there any additional questions that you ask if they are AI focused?
I think this is where like the old protocols and the old questionnaires still work a lot, just because it is still data governance. It's like, where do you put your data? How will my data be used? I mean, we had this conversation back in the day with ML. We had it before as well with any kind of training services. Where my data going to be used? Who's going to be able to access it? Will other customers be able to use the learning data that I generate? Will you share it with someone else? Like, I think that's where a lot of the question comes in. The other piece of it is just validating people are doing the best practice and following the industry standard for a lot of things. That's because there's so many new vendors are popping up, and that's always been the case. Like startups have always been popping up on a regular basis, but I think it's just the sheer volume of opportunistic companies that are coming up, and it's more like, are they doing the right thing with their situation? Like, while they might do the review, they might say that we have a single tenant solution, we're not going to share any data. It's all like you own and control all the data, but there are so many new companies. Like, are you doing the right thing from a corporate security perspective? Or do you have your SOC 2? Have you done audits? Do you have an ISO? Like, whatever you operate, like in whatever part of the world you're operating, have you done the right things to secure your data? Because it's one thing to see what are they doing intentionally with the data. Like, they can say they're doing all the right things, but if it is a two-person shop and suddenly you're starting to put all your internal data there for learning models, and you're starting to create your own ML just because they had a good deal with whatever cloud vendor to do cheap computing, they got a lot of seed money, whatever it is, but do they have the right security controls in place? Have you done an audit? Have you done a pen test on them? I think that's a bigger risk just because it's so fast to grow a very small company now. And this goes back to the whole piece in the beginning, like, where are you putting your data?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Again,
and it's all
not
about security hygiene, on it. Like, just have the good processes, demonstrate to me that you're trustworthy in all of these different aspects of security. It's not about, I figured out some sort of magic cryptography voodoo that makes this go away. It's about about show me that, the steps are thorough and robust and have been thought of and addressed.
Well, especially since, the whole concept of LLMs and GenAI is consuming a massive amount of learning data. That's the whole premise of it, like consume a lot of data to learn what should be out there and learn how to predict and generate the new content, which means that you have to feed it with a ton of data. And it's the whole base of the service. Feed it a ton of data that you had internally before, and now you're putting it somewhere else that you that you need to ensure that you trust that company. How trustworthy are they? So I think that's honestly one of the bigger challenges when you do, vendor assessment and vendor reviews now. Are they doing the right thing?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's sort of maybe shift to slow. I don't know if it's a more positive topic, but it's more about maybe opportunity on it. So, you started touching on this a little bit of, can we use Gen AI as defenders? So this is maybe a little bit more within the security industry from a tooling perspective. Where do you think we can use Gen AI to sort of be most valuable to us? And maybe it alludes a little bit to, in contrast to where attackers can use Gen AI to benefit them against us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had this conversation with a couple of leaders in the industry as well around like the usage and the benefit for Gen AI compared to previous technologies. And I think in general, the way I always look at it is like, is this a service that's going to benefit a attacking side, or is this going to be a sort of offensive side or defensive side? And I think that in the case of Gen AI, honestly, it's one of those where it is more a tool for an offensive side, just because it's based on creating creativity. It's based on helping people learn or do things that they did not have the skill set to do before, because it is an enabler. And I think that's why it's more a offensive tool than it's a defensive tool. If you look at like ML, for example, in general, ML is a very much more defensive tool because it allows you to do deep learnings about your data and allows you to harvest through a lot of data very quickly and effectively to find various patterns, to find various flaws, whatever it could be, versus which GenAI can as well, of course, but it requires a lot of training on your data. So it's not that you can just like shove a bunch of logs in there and think that you're going to get all the data out there in the world. But from an offensive perspective, it allows you to be very creative. So I think from a defensive perspective, one of the biggest areas that you'll benefit off it is honestly creating a lot of the boring stuff that people don't want to do in general. Creating the processes, creating the workflows, the runbooks, etc. I did even, I was laying in bed yesterday and I was like, hey, let me create a runbook for cloud-based defensive security of a CISO organization. And just started fiddling around a little bit on my phone to just see how well they could create a runbook for a first-line CISO incident. And it's actually not that bad. Like you get a really comprehensive list of runbooks and processes if you don't have them already. So I think creating the stuff that a lot of people don't have, or that a lot of people are taking for granted in terms of like runbooks, workbooks, what are my policies that I need to have and postures, like sanitizing and creating those is really good. Saying that I'm going to use GenAI for my active inline defense mechanism, it will still be used, but I think less than we have previously. And I think people will do a little bit of mistake of like, no, I think you're talking about ML now versus
versus kind of confuse the two. And the reason, like, is this about the kind of the depth and predictability? Like, is your distinction mostly that ML is when you say ML, you're referring to something that's a bit more like attuned to the specific use case. And so I know that this is whatever, like normal behavior versus abnormal behavior, or within expected realm or not, while the Gen AI has not been trained, maybe you fine-tuned it, maybe you changed it, but generally speaking, it just understands the language quite literally and derives from it. So it's sort of less trustworthy. Is that the concern you have with using it in defense?
I don't think it's a concern. I think it's more the applicable of the use case. I think in general for detective security and detective controls, I think more machine learning of saying like harvesting through data to find anomalies. Where do I have anomalies in my overall logs on a continuous basis? So just harvesting through a large chunk of data that you don't need to learn on. You just need to find anomalies and find differentiators from what the norm is. However, most people don't know what the norm is when it comes to like network traffic, whatever. But I think that's where ML is way more effective use case. From a defensive strategy of like how to build the services, that's where GenAI can come in. It's more proactive versus reactive security of how do I build the ML script? How do I build the detection script? How do I build, for example, these services or code to do whatever kind of detection or code, whatever to sanitize, or even just inputting a code and say like a CloudFormation template or an architecture saying like, just using it to detect where do I have potential flaws. Like from an assurance perspective, it's a really, really good use case. But I think that's more, it's from a proactive versus a reactive security standpoint. I think that's where it's really going to shine versus from a offensive security. It is definitely more from a reactive piece of like, how can I continuously adapt my attacks? How can I continuously create new vectors of it? Like take, for example, like social engineering, phishing exercises. That's where it's really going to shine of being able to like, I mean, we see now with voice impersonation, it's getting easier and easier, like going viral now with all the people that are like, hey, I'm going to make it sound like this radio star, this rock star, this musician. But that could also be, how am I going to make it sound like your CEO or your CFO and adapt the script automatically? I can make a video where someone is actually talking to you and setting up a video conference with you or a recorded message to you. And I mean, that's been around for a long time, but it's just way more effective and way more accurate. It's harder and harder to tell the difference of what is fabricated data versus real data. And if you get a call from your CEO saying that I'm in a customer meeting right now for a $2 billion deal, I can't access my laptop, there's very few people that will say no to the CEOs when they're asking for like, my password is not working. What is it? Yeah. So I think that's where there's so many opportunities to use it in an offensive way. And I think defensive is going to have more sober use cases. And I think it's more going to be on the proactive side than the reactive side.
Yeah. I think I understand that. I definitely relate to the concern on the offensive side, especially when you're, I guess, tricking humans, when you're attacking humans. Although I've sort of seen other use cases mentioned, I don't know how much they're operationalized at scale yet, that also talk about continuing down a path indeed. Okay, I've made it in, right? Or I've gotten this response. What should I try next? And to an extent, I think costs help keep that a little bit at bay, because if you're entirely statistical, you rely on the systems being cheap. And at the moment, Gen AI is still relatively expensive. but it helps there. I do wonder though whether I spoke to this one company that's really kind of increasingly they've evolved themselves from sort of security awareness to thinking about themselves as a security companion.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wonder whether that's something which is you can sort of almost have someone always looking over your shoulder and trying to identify if this makes sense or if it doesn't make sense. And the more context you give them responsibly and all that, then the more they can help you maybe avoid mistakes.
I think it's basically what we're talking about. It goes into the whole like proactive versus reactive security piece of it. And you're basically saying that every C-level or every security professional now have their own co-pilot. It's a decision co-pilot. Does this make sense? Even just running your like questions and like your decisions through a GenAI model of like, what is the best decision based on if I were I think just a executive prompt injection.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it will help, actually. I do think that it will make a lot more sound decisions. But I'm also a little bit concerned that we're losing a lot of innovation and intuitivity from individuals. Just in general, like your gut feeling still has to be there. I mean, I think that's also what comes with a lot of experience in general, like getting that gut feeling for it. But having a gut feeling co-pilot might not be a bad idea.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting thought of it. It might just require a slightly change of how we operate. So it's interesting to see how easy is it for people to accept such not see it as a big brother, but rather as a big brother's like government big brother type, corporate big brother, but rather as something that is helping them.
Yeah, no, but I do think that like a lot of companies would benefit from using it more effectively to create more effective policies and standards and structures of including run books and help create training awareness. Like that's one of the things that's going to help people the most is like, what is the training and awareness for things? What is your basic hygiene and help review and look at those items. I think that's where it's really going to shine from a defensive perspective. There was a recent conversation I saw, I can't remember which podcast it was now, but we were talking about a test against social engineering test against their support staff. And the ones that did most mistakes was the ones that have been there for 4 or 5 years, just because they were more comfortable with what they were doing, but also because most companies only do training when you start somewhere. Like you don't get continuous training for it and you become comfortable in it. So I do think that like having something using GenAI more in terms of proactive, creating better policies, creating more sound policies, take your InfoSec policy and run it through GenAI and say, simplify this so a human can understand it. Most people do not know what their policies are and what the standards are.
I mean, I think there was a lot of policies and all that, so probably something that helps you ingest those would be helpful.
Yeah, make it human readable.
Exactly. This is time kind of flies. We're having a conversation and doing it. I'm sure we can dig into many of these things very well, but I think we're kind of at time on it. Before I let you go, Henrik, I'll ask you my typical kind of closing question over here, which does change from time to time on it. But right now, it's if you could outsource one aspect of your job to AI, what would that be?
That's a mighty good question. I think, honestly, one of the things that I am curious about using more is as I said, like the co-pilot piece of it is, I spend a lot of time doing reviews of material, reviews of anything from architecture to plans, business plans to strategies, whatever it could be. I would love for people to use GenAI more to create the proactive material, to run through it, to make it human readable, simplified, remove a lot of the sort of the buzzword lingo that is often used in these and make it more easy to consume, compact and easy to consume. And I would love to do that on my own stuff as well. It's just both from a review perspective and writing perspective, simplify it. Yeah. So I think that's where like I think using it more and more, especially if I have it internal, so I know where the data is stored and can actually use it for sensitive material, but help to do more reviews. Does this make sense? Instead of me reading through 75 pages of something, give me the cliff notes. Yeah. I think that sounds super useful. It does bring up, there's some comics kind of floating through the web of someone writing 3 sentences and then using AI to create a long and detailed email, and then someone on the other side taking that long and detailed email, asking it to sort of summarize it to sort of these 3. So I do wonder how many counter tools exist to what you suggested, which does sound very useful. It's a little dystopian in one way, but at the same time, I think we all can become better writers and more concise of what is the point you're trying to make here.
Yeah, exactly. Henrik, thanks a lot for the great insights and for coming onto the podcast.
No, thank you, guys. It's I think we're going to see a lot more of this moving forward. I mean, recent changes that have happened, the industry is still just starting on it, especially from a security perspective. I think we have a lot more services coming that will definitely help people create better security posture in their own companies. So it's going to be interesting.
It will be. It will be indeed. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And I hope you join us for the next one.
Thank you all.
Thank you for listening to The Secure Developer. You will find other episodes and full transcripts on devseccon.com. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and don't forget to leave us a review on Apple iTunes or Spotify, and share the episode with others who may enjoy it and gain value from it. If you would like to recommend a guest or topic or share some feedback, you can find us on Twitter at DevSecCon and LinkedIn at The Secure Developer. See you in the next episode.